What would all endings for the nation of Finland look like? In this video, I'll explore some interesting concepts you may or may not have heard of, like Greater Finland, incorporating Karelia and the Kola Peninsula, Red Finland and White Finland, but also some more outrageous endings, like Austro-Hungarian Finland and Uralic Empire Finland. Watch the video up until the end to see what Finland could look like in other timelines. Finland is a relatively young country, only gaining independence in 1917, after the abdication of Nicholas II, but its people and their culture and language have their roots in the very beginnings of European history. Finland is one of only 3 countries that speak an Uralic language. The Uralic people originated from Siberia and came to settle all of these countries. However, there are many people scattered across Europe and Asia who have Uralic heritage but have not managed to form their own nation. The Finnish, however, did manage to form a nation, and Finland, in its current ending, is one of the best countries to be born in. So, what do some of the other endings look like? Greater Finland actually came very close to existing in our timeline in World War II, but with a little bit of hindsight, we can see that the establishment of an extended Finnish state would have been easier in the interwar period. In 1921, the East Karelian Uprising was organized. It aimed to secede from Soviet Russia and potentially establish an independent East Karelian state. The Finnish government quickly sent aid and some 550 volunteers who acted as officers for the rebels, which, despite the minuscule quantity, definitely helped. However, the Finnish support provoked Trotsky to threaten with war, and the uprising was quelled by 20,000 Red Army soldiers transported by the Murmansk Railway. The uprising was a golden opportunity for Finland, if they had landed support for the rebels, allowing them to capture the Murmansk Railway and put up a substantial fight. The uprising's chances for success would be drastically higher. This decision would probably lead to a war with the Soviet Union, and in that case, victory and the incorporation of East Karelia into Finland is uncertain. Some things that we can change to increase Finland's chances are to extend the Soviet-Polish War, which had just ended when the uprising started. We can also have the Soviets do some sort of drastic mistake, which would suspend their fighting capabilities, and we can also have the Finnish cause gather more international support. With all of these factors, Finland would probably win the conflict and be able to incorporate Karelia. But there actually might have been an even better time to execute a similar plan. In 1920, after the British withdrew from the region, there was a White Karelian uprising. It had less support and was less organized and widespread than the one in 1921, but in 1920 the Soviets had to manage more fronts and were less stable than in 1921. So if Finland organized with Poland, Ukraine and the Karelians, they would surely have succeeded in attacking Russia. If they were lucky, they might even capture Leningrad. In both scenarios, Finland comes out looking like this. From here on, they have 2 ways to expand and retain the territories they have already gotten. One is collaborating with the Soviets. Finland could even receive the Kola Peninsula and some borderlands as a reward for joining the Soviet bloc. The Soviets wouldn't have much reason to keep Kola anymore, as it was isolated and under threat. Finland could join the actual Soviet Union as a socialist republic, or they could just be a Soviet clan state. Nevertheless, the future of this Finland would be similar to most communist bloc states. They would suffer under communist oppression, and after the collapse of the USSR, there would be a period of relative chaos and corruption. Finland would probably keep its large size after its second independence, which would probably be around the 80s or 90s, and by 2023, it would be economically similar to Finland and other Nordics in our timeline. This Finland, however, would have a larger population, stronger army, and more potential for growth. The non-cooperative choice brings with it more risk, but Finland won't have to be subjugated by the Soviets. If Finland doesn't cooperate, it would probably have to deal with the Winter War, which they may or may not win, but assuming they manage to beat the Soviets, they could capture the Kola Peninsula and retain their extended borders. However, even if Finland loses, there is still a chance. This is an ending where Finland joins the Axis and expands its territory. You could take this as a continuation of the last ending, or as its own thing. It would work basically the same either ways. Let's get into it. The Continuation War, which started in 1941 when Germany launched Operation Barbarossa aimed to reclaim Finland's lost lands in the Winter War. Upon the declaration of the war, Finland did not join the Axis, and they were in more of an alliance of convenience with Germany. The war is separate from World War II by the fact that Finland signed a separate peace in 1941, which gave them their current borders. This showcases that the level of cooperation and invested interest between Finland and Germany was very low, and if we are to have Finland winning this conflict, it's best Finland tries its best to achieve Germany's goals. In our timeline, Finland's strategy focused on regaining lost territories and achieving a more defensible border. Their military cooperation with the Axis was limited to the northern theater of the Eastern Front. In this alternate timeline, Finland is all in with Germany, and their main strategic objectives would be the capture of Leningrad and the splitting or full occupation of the Murmansk Railway, which was a vital artery for Allied land lease. This would significantly increase the Axis chances for victory, and after the war is over, Finland would expand to these borders. Of course, even if Finland gives it its all, the Axis might still lose. So let's move away from radical nationalism and see what good old monarchism can bring to Finland. This is a general ending where Finland, after its independence, chooses the path of monarchy instead of republicanism and democracy. In 1919, Finland adopted a republican constitution and established a parliamentary system, choosing to incorporate the northern model of governance. This set the country on its path of democracy, social security, and the free market. But in an alternate timeline, Finland's origins could have been more influenced by empires like Germany and Russia, which had sway over the country in the 20th century. The impact of this influence might be a Finland that chooses to become a kingdom instead of a republic. The Kingdom of Finland would lay somewhere between Germany and its Scandinavian neighbors in the spectrum of the monarchy's authority. This country would probably be worse off than Finland in our timeline if we look to other monarchies of that time as an example. But let's get more specific. What if Finland didn't just have any king, but the most competent monarch of the 20th century, the last Tsar of the Russian Empire, Nicholas II himself? In 1917, Nicholas II abdicated the throne, which meant the Grand Duchy of Finland was left without a ruler and could now pursue its independence. However, if we are to envision a world where Nicholas only abdicated some of his titles and escaped to Finland, a Finnish monarchy with him as its ruler begins to look a little more likely. Nicholas abdicated because he finally realized the severity of the crisis and was hoping that the provincial government would fix the mess he left them, or at least take the blame away from him. He didn't foresee communism prevailing in Russia, resulting in his subsequent demise. In this alternate ending, the Tsar is more cautious of the threat that the communist movement poses to him, so he chooses to go into exile in Finland. He might also choose to keep his title as the Grand Duke of Finland. If he plays his cards right and goes along with Finnish desires for a separate state, he might become the constitutional monarch of the country. You might think that Finland would have no use for the Romanovs, but that's not really true. The Romanovs were a well-connected family, and their presence would bring prestige to the country, and the recognition of Finland as a sovereign nation from the previous Tsar of Russia would bring legitimacy to the Finnish state. The people of Finland would not like the Romanovs, at least at first, and their presence would probably worsen the divide between the whites and the reds, resulting in a larger civil war than the one in our timeline. The Soviet Union would also despise the Finns for sheltering the Romanov family, but they would probably not declare war to try to wipe out the monarchist threat. That's because the other European monarchs would all support Finland, since they would be very threatened by the fact that the Soviet Union would declare war on a neighboring country just because they don't like the monarch in charge. This might even escalate into a full-blown crusade against communism, which the early Soviet Union would be woefully unprepared to fight, so the Soviets would refrain from attacking, at least until the start of World War II. But before that happens, the Tsardom of Finland would have time to cooperate with other anti-Soviet states, like Poland, the Baltics, Scandinavia, Romania, and the rest of the Balkans. Using the Romanov connections and the increasing hostilities in Europe, Finland could become the cornerstone of an intermedium alliance. Because the formation of the intermedium would change a lot, I won't go too far into this ending, but if you want to see what would happen in a similar scenario, give this video a look. Now that we have seen what an emperor from the Entente could do for Finland, let's have a look at an ending where an emperor from the Central Powers becomes the Kaiser of Finland. This ending is not as complicated as the previous one. In this alternate timeline, after Finland wins the civil war against the communists in the country, they decide to become a constitutional monarchy and pick Karol I as the King of Finland. The Hapsburg king will have ambitions to expand and maybe even try to establish the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Under his rule, Finland might try to expand into the Baltics into the early 1930s. If they manage to secure German support, this operation would probably be successful. They also somehow gain Franz Joseph Land. I don't know how, but it would be criminal behavior to not give this archipelago to Hapsburg Finland. If German cooperation continues, Adolf could use Karol I for a more legitimate way to annex Austria. There could be a referendum in the country to reinstate Karol I as king and bring back the Hapsburg Empire, which at this point would have these borders. With enough German meddling, the referendum might be successful and Karol would be reinstated. This would be beneficial to Germany because Italy and France would not have reason to intervene since this was all Austrian internal affairs. In our timeline, in July 1934, Adolf attempted to orchestrate a coup in Austria to install a pro-nationalist socialist government and pave the way for Anschluss. The plan envisioned Austrian radical nationalists assassinating the Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss, who opposed the idea of an Anschluss and had established an authoritarian regime in Austria. The coup failed, and Dollfuss was killed during the events that unfolded. The Austrian government suppressed the National Socialist uprising, and Germany, facing international condemnation and the threat of military intervention from Italy, backed down. Mussolini had his own expansionist ambitions in Europe and saw Austria as part of the Italian sphere of influence. Mussolini was concerned about German expansion into Central Europe and did not want Austria to fall under Germany's control. So he sent divisions to Austria, which made Germany back down because they weren't ready for war. But if Germany executes the plan of putting Karol I in power, they won't have to be ready for war, since the Italians will not have a reasonable excuse to intervene in a supposedly non-German influenced referendum in Austria. After the referendum, the Austro-Finnish Empire would be established, but the country would be unified and an empire only in theory. The Austrian part of the nation would basically become a full-on German puppet, with Karol retaining little to no influence. This would of course be a part of the deal with the Germans, since they wouldn't just let him have Austria with nothing to gain for themselves. A major consequence of this would be the crumbling of Italian-German relations. In our timeline, Italy accepted Anschluss because they had become isolated from the previous allies after the Abyssinian War and wanted to pursue an alliance with Germany, viewing them as the dominant power in Europe. But in this alternate timeline, Anschluss happens before the Abyssinian War, so Italy would be pissed at Germany, and they would try to reclaim their influence over Austria. They wouldn't outright declare war, because by that point they would have no support from the Austrian government, unlike 1934 in our timeline, but instead they would just orient their strategy against Germany. To make a long story short, Italy would side with the Allies after the ultimatum to Poland. This would prevent the collapse of the Western Front, keeping France in the war. A few years of war later, Austria-Finland, seeing the growing Soviet threat and disappointed with Germany's inability to finish off France, would make a secret agreement with Italy. The Italians would help the Austro-Finns expand, and in turn, they will switch sides and attack Germany. This is sort of a weird reflection of the Lapland War, which happened in our timeline. If this plan is successful, the borders of the restored Hapsburg Empire could look something like this. I believe this nation and its allies would deter the Soviets from pursuing territorial expansion in the Baltics and Finland. However, if the nation gets isolated from their allies and suffers internal strife, they would be in big trouble. The Soviet Union in this timeline would be a military and economic beast even greater than the one in our timeline. That's because they would have not suffered the insane casualties and economic strife that Operation Barbarossa brought with it. So in the near future, Europe might have to battle against the Red Menace. So, this ending resulted in a pretty large Finland, but this next one is way bigger. This is an ending for Finland where they unite all the Uralic speaking lands. I'm not going to pretend I know how this nation could have formed, but it's not impossible. For this nation to have formed, there must be a pan-Uralic movement like there was for Germany and Italy. This is unlikely because the Uralic ones were majorly Russified and the low infrastructure and population density would not help the idea spread at all. However, such a movement is not impossible. National identities are often formed through works of art that depict and spread people's shared heritage, constructing a group identity in the process. This nation would have a chance to unify around World War I or before Russia was formed. But if it existed today, it would have a population of about 20 million and probably a GDP around double that of Finland. Overall, it would be a major player in European politics and might be a significant player in global affairs, depending on if they're victorious in some of the major conflicts that happened in the 20th century. A united Scandinavia is an alternate history classic, so I won't dive that deep into how the Union was formed. In a few words, Sweden-Norway backs Denmark in the German-Danish War, resulting in a change in the succession of Denmark, leading to the formation of Scandinavia. The Scandinavian Union would incorporate Finland in World War I. This could happen right after Finnish independence or after the Finnish Civil War. If this results in a war with the Soviets, I can see the Scandinavian Union being really successful in the conflict and annexing Estonia or even all of the Baltics. And if they don't manage to do that, they'll definitely manage to annex Eastern Karelia and the Kola Peninsula. This is because Scandinavia would have been in a state of stability and economic prosperity after being neutral in World War I. Comparatively, the communist Russians would be fighting on multiple fronts whilst having to suppress insurgencies and figure out their political system. The Soviet Union would want to reclaim its lost land, which would threaten Scandinavia and make them drift towards Germany. With Scandinavian support, Operation Barbarossa would be way more successful. The Germans might even achieve their Archangels to Astrakhan line. This might secure their ultimate victory and cement authoritarianism and oppression as the future of Europe. However, if the United States of America uses the nuclear bomb on Germany and organizes a successful naval invasion with Britain, the Axis will fall and Scandinavia would be dismantled. This might lead to a greater Finland, aligned to the West, being established.